Tim Ferriss, my man, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Good to see you, brother.
Likewise.
Last time I saw you was at the Burning Man airport, and somehow I managed to not see you while I was at Burning Man, but now I know why.
It's true.
Because you were working your ass off.
I had a few commitments.
A few commitments is a little bit of an understatement because you were working for Zendo, which is the Psychedelic Harm Reduction arm of maps.org. And you were working, obviously, the most important shift.
Graveyard shift.
The graveyard shift.
Midnight to 8 a.m.
The overnight shift. So as if Burning Man wasn't fucked up enough and challenging enough,
Yeah.
You really put yourself in the thick of it, like right in the heat of the flame.
I did. I wanted to give back from the other side, having been supervised in the past myself, to people who in some cases may not be prepared at all for the experience that they sign up for at Burning Man. Meaning there are people, for those who may not be aware, who show up to Zendo who are not on any drugs, who are having psychotic breaks of one type or another because Burning Man itself is already so overstimulated and disorienting.
Yeah.
Can be, at least. And
sometimes so much so that you take psychedelics and like it is not even as strong as Burning Man itself. So like your whole dosing has to be reevaluated as well, because the whole thing is so overwhelming with light and fire and sound and friendship and some kind of unusual ingestion of food and water, which is not according to your normal schedule. Like everything is thrown up in the air.
The environment's totally different, right?
Yeah.
So you have people who may not be prepared for sandstorms. They may not have proper goggles. They may not have a Camelback, so they could be dehydrated already. And then you add on top of that the feeling that many people have, which is the Burning Man experience would not be complete without some type of drug ingestion. So they use LSD for the first time, for instance, in the deep playa, and their friends have 100 at-bats, so they decide to do 200, 300 micrograms. And that is not necessarily what I would call a controlled environment.
No.
And so a fair number of them end up then at Zendo, typically brought in by their friends because they are experiencing any range of emotions or states, going from acute paranoia, very common, to acute
paranoia, the classic. I think my friends are trying to kill me.
Yeah,
I think
or people are recording my voice. All of you are out to get me.
Yeah, I've had a few people call me feeling that, and I listened very patiently. And I said, "Aha, I see. You're experiencing what's called the classic. This is called the classic, and you're gonna be okay."
Yeah. One of the jokes that one of the organizers and the staff are all volunteers. There are a lot of volunteers, so and it's very well orchestrated. And there is a flow for administration, or I should say rather intake and medical evals and so on, because not everyone is appropriate for Zendo, which is really intended for people who are having a tough time psychologically or emotionally, not physiologically. So if someone is taken 5 times the amount of MDMA that would be considered a normal dose, and they're experiencing heart palpitations or any type of physical distress, then they would get escalated to
the medicinal side of the
They would be sent. Be sent to medical. The joke that I heard was a number of the folks who'd been involved with the Zendo for a long time wanted to put a huge sign up inside the yurts that said, "You took a drug and it is working." Because the overwhelming feeling by, I would say, many people who end up in Zendo who are having a tough time is that something is going wrong. They're having an abnormal experience. So the training, which all volunteers need to undergo beforehand, is fairly simple and straightforward. You're not supposed to guide. You're not supposed to play shaman. You're not supposed to shake a rattle and sing at people. You are really just there to listen and empathize. And on some level,
just constantly assure them with your not freaking out that, hey, you're fine. This is
normalize
normal.
it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So when people are having these anxiety bouts, just saying, "Oh yeah, that's very common. Like, you're actually doing much better than half of the people I've seen come through tonight. So you're doing great."
And it's so fucking cool that, this is not something that had to be there. This is just intelligent, conscious, awakened adults, like the people working for MAPS, and like a lot of other people like yourself who are deciding, all right, if you're going to create an environment where people are going to recreationally take psychedelics, and sometimes, spiritually and intentionally take psychedelics at Burning Man, the whole gamut, the whole spectrum is available there. But if you're going to have that, have some kind of system that actually cares for people psychologically. And it's just one of those things where in some way a free market of non-paid volunteers has just developed to create this environment, which is fucking beautiful.
Yeah, it's a very, from what I observed, at least this time around, doing as many shifts as humanly possible from midnight to 8 a.m. It's very well run, and it's a shame that you don't see that type of harm reduction at more festivals and in more environments, because the legislature and regulations and laws are set up, Rave Act being one of them, in such a way that for an organizer to have harm reduction is viewed as an admission of guilt, an admission of condoning drug use at their event.
It's like trying to teach actual sexual education. You're then condoning, underage premarital sex, which is so stupid because, you have to realize the practical truth of the matter, which is people are having sex and people are taking drugs. Yeah. Sorry, everybody. That's the world. Yeah, so are we going to deal with it? Or are we just going to close a blind eye, plug our ears like that, hear no evil, see no evil monkey and go, la, 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 not happening.
Yeah.
And unfortunately we've been in that paradigm for way too fucking long.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. So if we're going to look past the complete inefficacy of prohibition and preaching abstinence to contend with the reality, and just how human nature leads us to that reality, then Zendo is a great place to both observe how that functions in practice and also to gain some experience myself.
Yeah, totally.
To see how I react to those type of circumstances. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to predict in advance. I remember doing a training in San Francisco at one point with NERT, which is the Northern California Emergency Response Team or training, and it's done by the fire department, the police department, to train civilians to help in disaster scenarios, earthquakes, and so on, because law enforcement cannot handle any real black swan event, which wouldn't even be a black swan event.
We're not talking about yoga people.
Yeah, no, we're not. We're talking about, say, a 7+ Richter scale earthquake.
Yep.
And you don't have to look very far back to say Loma Prieta, the World Series earthquake in Northern California, to see how badly things can turn out. Mm-hmm. And we did a number of exercises. Everyone was volunteering but paying for this training, where they would have us basically self-assemble into groups of, say, 3 to 5. We would choose someone to be a team lead. We'd step outside of the classroom, and then they would flip over tables and have people strewn all over the floor, pretending to be in various states of distress. Like someone's had a leg blown off, someone's dying, someone's just hurt, someone's just worried, some people are screaming. None of it's real, right? This is all play acting. And when you walked in, it was really fascinating to see how many people you never would have predicted would do well, did really well and were calm. And then other people who were like the toughest dudes in the class would just freeze.
Yeah.
And until you're in those circumstances, you really don't know how you are going to respond. So I also wanted to just subject myself to that.
And it's, my stepdad was on the SWAT team, and he talks about this as well. And any type of high operator like Tim Kennedy or something, I mean, a lot of the training is designed to push you past those moments of freezing. And you may think like, I handled situations pretty well, but I've been in situations where I've totally frozen. Like I was in Australia, and I may have told this story a long time ago on a podcast too, but I was in Australia, and there was this buddy I was hanging out with who had a trick where he could light Bundaberg rum from the nozzle of the bottle, and then when it hit his mouth, it would go out and he would chug it. So he'd create this like flaming spout. Well, homeboy decided to try and do it with overproof rum, which was like the difference between 60 or whatever, or 70 proof to like 110 proof. Well, he lit the 110 proof rum. It didn't go out. And so the spout, instead, it started flaming through his mouth, and then he started missing his mouth, and then his face caught on fire. And we're in the kitchen of the house that I was renting. And I just started looking at him with his face on fire, going, oh no, oh no, what do I do now? So I went to the faucet and started splashing water from the spout of the faucet like an idiot. Like, that's not the move. We had towels, like kitchen towels. I should have thrown one of those on him, and smothered it. But I've never prepared for that, and other guys were just looking at him completely frozen and like unable to move. And those are the type of situations that, unless you put yourself in that kind of hypothetical scenario, like, what would I do in this case? You may not act at all, or you may act incorrectly, so it's important, I think, for all like responsible adults to kind of either go through formalized training or at least go through the mental practices of like, all right, what would I do in this case? How would I handle this?
How many people have ever used a fire extinguisher or the fire extinguisher they have in their kitchen, right? So to think that if something really goes sideways and there's some type of gas or oil fire in your house where things are catching, the first time you use this fire extinguisher, you're going to use it perfectly properly. You're going to nail it.
My fire extinguisher experience is watching Jackass videos.
Yeah, right.
That is my entire fire extinguisher experience.
So it's like, all right, might be a good idea to like take that thing out in a parking lot and play with it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Cost $30. Get another one.
That's a very good point. All right, so tell me about some of the, tell me about some of the interesting cases that you saw. There had to be a few that stood out that either taught you something about yourself or taught you something about the experience or human nature.
Well, I realized very quickly for myself that the name of the game in almost every case I ran into, I did not have anybody who was completely losing their mind and violent. There were a few cases. I only saw 2 cases like that when I was volunteering. Those were assigned to other people and then got escalated very quickly. Mm-hmm. So I did not have an opportunity to work on any of the complete red line cases.
Yeah,
but did have a number of people who were having a very, very tough time. I did have had an experience in my first shift, which I was very grateful for, which was working with a couple. And then after that experience, each time I volunteered, when they were doing roll call and asking the volunteers to sign in, they would ask if we had any special experience or skills. And in the first shift, I was like, well, I don't even know how to respond to that. But then by the second shift, I was like, well, I can sit for couples, right? I've done that once. And ended up then sitting for another couple. And what was true in both cases that I found amusing and in retrospect not surprising was that the couple would come in and the guy would be like, yeah, my girlfriend's having a really tough time. She's having a really tough time. And then they would sit down and the girlfriend would be maybe a little teared up, would like promptly fall asleep. And then the guy would proceed to like completely freak out.
Yeah. I'm here because my girl needs some help. Let's just get that clear, right? Yeah. I wouldn't check into Zendo on my own.
Yeah. And that spoke to me on a few levels because I think that it's also possible to hold your own state in check long enough to take care of someone else. And as soon as that's removed, then the shroud drops and you have to face whatever it is you're contending with personally.
Yeah.
And I've certainly had that experience myself where you go through a really stressful period or experience, but you have someone else or something else to look out for. And as soon as that's removed, you're exhausted or all of the fatigue and so on.
It's almost like you adopt the identity of the caretaker of X person, X position, ignoring and kind of like a classic triage, where you handle the most vital crisis first and then ignoring your own stuff until it's time for you to actually take that deep breath and look at yourself and be like, oh, actually, I have a bullet hole too. Yeah. Should mention that.
And overall, I would say that I found the normalizing of the experience by whatever means are at your disposal to diffuse or de-escalate things the fastest. So rather than, which we're not supposed to do at Zendo anyway, and I didn't make any real attempts to do this, but rather than trying to, along the lines of, say, a guided MDMA session to walk people through their stuff and ask them questions and probe and
tell me about your mother.
Yeah, right. Instead of doing that, asking them about how they felt, doing very basic things, getting them water, getting them blankets, but also, whenever they seem panicked by their own response, to normalize it. So given, for instance, that I have a decent amount of mileage with various psychedelics, to say, oh, I've been in your shoes, they would almost always ask me within the first 10 minutes, like, why are you here? Why are you sitting here? Mm-hmm. You're at Burning Man. You've paid a lot for a ticket. Why are you sitting here? And I would say, well, because I've been in your shoes. I've been sitting there when someone else has watched me.
Yeah. And
I want to return the favor. And that immediately seemed to put them at ease. It was really, to me, and I can see how this also applies to non-enhanced therapy sessions or talking to people who are having any type of destabilizing experience. Making it normal goes a long way. So for instance, when people come in who are really paranoid, one thing, and this was advice I was given, and I thought to myself, wow, this is really good advice that transcends Zendo. And it was not to deny the paranoia. Meaning, if they come in and they say, my friends at camp are recording my voice and they're going to use it to blackmail me, and you guys are all recording me and I know it, and da-da-da-da, rather than saying, that's not true, let me lay out the facts, which 9 times out of 10 is simply going to lead to them saying,
doubling down
I knew
on
it.
their
I
paranoia.
knew it.
Yeah.
Of course you would say that. I knew you wouldn't trust me. I knew you wouldn't believe me. Instead of saying that, but also instead of confirming that's the truth, which of course it is not, and saying, wow, but instead saying something like, that sounds really hard. Like, tell me about that. That sounds like it must be a really difficult experience for you. Like, if I put myself in your shoes, that would be really stressful. Like, tell me about that. So you're not denying it, you're not confirming it, but you're empathizing with it. I thought it was a very smart, oblique strategy that I don't think would have occurred to me without someone mentioning it.
I think also recognizing that all these feelings are universal.
Yeah.
Like, humans share the full gamut of ecstatic, positive experiences and negative experiences. We just kind of fill in the details a little different, have it served to us in a slightly different way. Like, yeah, everybody's been injured and hurt and felt weak and, not themselves. Well, mine recently was driving off the road in the middle of the day and taking a guardrail to the face and having no feeling in the center of my face. Well, that might be slightly unique to me, but nonetheless, who hasn't been in a position where something has happened and they felt, hurt and knocked down and not themselves? And so, like, finding the ways to, at least internally or sometimes vocally, drawing the analogies like, I've felt my own version of what you feel. And man, that is hard.
Yeah.
So valuable for them to know, like, okay, we're all in this kind of shared experience.
Totally. And it made me think about how that could apply outside of Zendo also. Mm-hmm. Like, how many conversations or arguments or debates have I had in my life where that would have been the right response? Yeah. Instead of saying that's true or that's not true, let me lay out the facts, just saying, wow, that sounds really hard. Yeah. That sounds really hard. Like, I'm sorry to hear you're experiencing that. Like, tell me more. How many times could I have diffused or facilitated something by taking that third option?
I don't know, hundreds, probably.
Yeah, thousands. I mean,
every argument
every other
argument you've had. I mean, understanding, that was a huge shift for me in relationship. Understanding that the emotional truth of another person, it's not your job to like logically dismantle and disregard somebody else's emotional truth. You have to acknowledge their emotional truth. Like, I see what you're feeling and I empathize with exactly how you're feeling. And then maybe you can start addressing some of the facts. But the very first thing is acknowledge that an emotional truth is real at that level. And the mechanical, robotic dismantling of the reasons behind that truth is just going to create more anger and distance and than actually solving the problem. I mean, this will shorten any confrontation or argument you have by like 10,000%. Yeah. If you just listen and radically empathize with that emotional truth. And that sounds exactly like the training at Zendo, but it applies absolutely to every relationship.
Totally.
Yeah. What's interesting too is, you obviously did this training at Zendo, which is designed to bring you people, but I've been in dozens of plant medicine ceremonies, and there's been a few cases out of the 50 or so traditional ceremonies I've been to in Peru, whether it's Wachuma or Vilca or ayahuasca or something like that, there's been a few cases where people have kind of lost it. Like that is a part of the protocol. Kyle tells a story about a guy who managed to get his hands on a shovel during an ayahuasca ceremony and was swinging his shovel at all the attendants. And they call Kyle because Kyle's a big old guy who can handle himself. And like, Kyle, go fucking handle this guy with the shovel. And Kyle's all blasted on ayahuasca and like, well, fuck, should I choke him out? Like, what, duck the first shovel hit and like get him in a choke, like a guillotine? Like, what am I going to do here? Because he's trying to think that. And then this shovel wielding guy, and Kyle just came up with love and basically did the same thing in a loving way, empathize with where he was at, and the guy just laid down the shovel and they put arm in arm back to the thing.
He was like, I feel you. Plan B, if you don't put down the shovel, I kick you in the head.
Yeah, exactly. He did have a plan B. He fucking worked out his plan B. And interestingly, it wasn't a shovel for me, but I was in a Wachuma ceremony where somebody there, not in our group, but somebody there, grabbed a saber from the table and was actually not using it towards other people, but was actually like trying to cut himself. It was like a ceremonial decorative saber. So there's no chance of actually breaking the skin. But and then he switched from that to like a stingray tail and was saying, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy. And the shaman, Don Howard, had to kind of control the room and kind of keep the energy all right. And there really wasn't, he doesn't have a big attendance staff that can handle a big guy who's so I kind of stepped up and really the key there for me being able to handle that, even though I'm blasted on Wachuma too, and it's not exactly my ideal scenario for the night, was just to explain how, I've also felt feelings of unworthiness, and I've also been in that same position, and that we are all worthy and that we are all full of love, and give him a big hug and give him some love, and actually traded my necklace with his and says, here, take mine. This is filled with all the love that I carry and all the word, and you're worthy of it. Like, I'll give this to you. And then watches that thing kind of de-escalated with love and empathy and care, rather than, trying to wrangle the sword from him, pry it from his fingers, tie him down, which I think is a lot of times that first kind of cop response. Man with sword, calling all other cops, man with sword, and you just beat the shit out of him and take the sword out. But I think so many situations could probably be handled by that. And yeah, maybe there is a plan B. Maybe there is something, well, if this does turn really south, like more like a PCP encounter, like my stepdad used to tell me, where, people would really get aggressive and there was really no option to get through that mental framework other than physical force. Okay, maybe that is, that 5% chance that might be. But first, let's try empathy and let's try love and let's try to de-escalate this without something more harmful.
I was really impressed by a number of the more experienced staff at Zendo, where there's one particular case, this youngish guy, probably 31, 32, if I had to guess, came in and he was just in hysterics, like flailing around, clearly furious, enraged, asking people to call 911 because he was being held against his will. I mean, very possibly going to turn to violence, and was like really whipping around and was putting a lot of people on edge. And a number of the volunteers did their best to manage this scenario, but ultimately ended up having that case escalated to a very diminutive young woman with a lot of experience, had been volunteering for a number of different years and might have been a team lead at that point or one of the coordinators. And this guy had been ranting and raving, and you could hear him just yelling and screaming from several structures away. Sure. And within, I'd say 5 or 10 minutes, she had him just calmly laying on the ground, talking to her while she sat there cross-legged. And I walked to the bathroom and kind of observed it, looking sideways, both to the bathroom and back. And it was completely under control at that point. I don't know exactly what she did, but I was very impressed by how repeatable the de-escalation approach seemed to be. Another thing they said very early on in the training was that sometimes it's not about your training and technique. If somebody shows up and they are having an extremely difficult time on any number of substances, and you remind them of their ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend or dad who used to beat the shit out of them, doesn't matter what you do. They need somebody else. Right. So there are cases where it's just like, okay, I am not the right person/persona for this interaction. And it doesn't have to do with me or what I do.
Surrendering the ego completely, surrendering this idea that you need to be the savior. And if you're not the savior, you're not worthy. And you got to let all of that go, whether you're a shaman or whether you're a caretaker, whether you're a provider, or whether you're just sitting in on, kind of a situation where your friends invite you, hey, can you come in for this conversation? We'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah.
You got to be
a cop or a parent
or anything.
You name it.
I mean, they call it the hollow bone, right? I mean, that's the symbol of the shaman, is someone who clears all of their shit out so that they're empty, so that they're not personally attached to outcome. They're not personally attached to anything. They're just there to be of service. And if you can adopt that mindset, you're going to be by far the most effective. And shit, we can do that with ourselves. That's the thing too. All this practice, like we all have these mini freakouts, these mini moments where, we think everything, whether we're on psychedelics or not, with these mini moments where we think we need help or things aren't making sense, where we're fueling ourselves with anger or jealousy, and to be able to be the observer and be like, okay, Aubrey, I see you right now. And I see you because you feel small and wounded and a little sick right now. I see that your jealousy is coming up to the surface. And really what that means is you just need to let that pass and understand that you are still worthy and this is temporary and all things are good, and be the observer of yourself and be your own sitter to a certain degree, and have that kind of empathic, calm, de-escalating nature. Because it's very easy to start spinning up facts and creating a story and building this case of, proof of love, and someone doesn't love you or some situation is there. You can be, your own Johnny Cochran, come and slay yourself, or you can be a little more chill and a little more passive.
And I would also suggest to people listening that one thing I found very helpful for improving my self-talk has been working on speaking with others. So rather than working on the self-talk directly, say listening to audiobooks or lectures or reading books on nonviolent communication and then practicing that with others, I've seen impact the way I talk to myself, which I would very much encourage people to look into. Neil Strauss originally, I suppose I'd probably had nonviolent communication recommended to me 1,000 times, but eventually when Neil Strauss, who's probably 8-time New York Times bestselling author at this point, who's become a friend, said that the book he would recommend most often to others is this lecture on nonviolent communication. So I took notice of that because his job is good communication. I mean, he's done countless interviews for the New York Times and Rolling Stone and so on. So when he pays attention to some particular approach to communication, I pay attention.
Yeah. Do you remember the title of that?
It is, I believe, just nonviolent communication. The thumbnail, I want to say it's like a hand making a peace sign or a thumbs up or something, which is it's considered a lecture. I want to say it's 5 hours and some number of minutes, reasonably easy to find on Audible or elsewhere. And I do recommend the audio because the delivery is also exceptional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So excluding Zendo, what is your take on Burning Man? I mean, what's your take on this fucking crazy experience that we collectively make in the desert every year?
I think it is, speaking as someone who's only been 3 times, I mean, this is my 3rd time. This most recent trip was my first time in nearly a decade. So a lot has changed as well. The magnitude, the technology is all really dramatically changed. But it's a miraculous display of human ingenuity, and
I almost feel like it's in some ways some of the best that we can do.
Yeah, it's spectacular. I mean, it really is, in the most literal sense, spectacular. It is a spectacle that is hard to express to someone who has not experienced it. Riding out for the first night into what is considered the deep playa, for those people who don't know, Burning Man is roughly organized, if you're looking at it from 30,000 feet, like a horseshoe with the open end at the top. And there are coordinates following the clock face all the way around this horseshoe. So from, I guess it's 2 to 10 o'clock. and then from A out to whatever it is, L or something, from the inside of the horseshoe to the outside. Then there's this big pocket in the middle of the horseshoe, which is considered deep playa, which is this no man's land, which is this salt flat where there are art cars and structures and weird bars and temples and all sorts of things.
Beautiful art.
Yeah. And when the first night I rode out with a very close friend of mine, the first night I was there, and I arrived early for the mandatory Zendo training. I thought to myself, this is something that everyone should experience once, if they can.
Yep.
Just to see how spectacular it is. And I've a lot of other thoughts on Burning Man, but I think first and foremost, it is just a overwhelming sense of amazement that something like this could be created. All the more so because it did not start that long ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not long ago that it was a 9-foot man in Northern California. It was not that long ago. Mm-hmm. This is not something with hundreds of years of momentum behind it. Yeah. Which makes it all the more impressive in some respects. I think that Burning Man is also, and one could make this argument for the Running of the Bulls or many other festivals or spectacles of this type. I think much like psychedelics, or we could be more specific and just say, for instance, LSD, that it is a non-specific amplifier of whatever happens to be going on. Mm-hmm. So if you go into Burning Man expecting, for instance, that like your relationship is just automatically going to be so much closer by the end of Burning Man.
Oh, shit.
I should tell you that if it is just going to add a tremendous amount of pressure, the PSI are going to triple and quadruple.
And you know what that fucking does?
Yeah.
That exposes the cracks.
It exposes all of the cracks.
So you have to be prepared to deal with your shit.
Yeah.
Collectively, individually. Yeah. You go with a big crew and there's dynamics in that crew and different things that are there, hidden, latent under the surface, unexpressed, truth that hasn't been brought to 100.
Yeah.
This is going to bring that shit out.
Yeah. So think about a substance / hippie woo-woo fueled Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
And there is certainly that aspect of Burning Man, which in some ways does not detract from it. It is one of the characteristics.
No doubt. The difference between Lord of the Flies is Lord of the Flies had a certain scarcity to it, where Burning Man teaches you through a certain level of abundance, so to speak, in that there's so much light, so much music, so much love, so much possibility for enjoyment. You actually have to meter out your own and make these decisions like, do I go to sleep tonight? Do I do more drugs? What do I do?
Yeah.
And so you have this radical freedom to take in all you can eat. It's not like when you go to the bars in Austin, you got 2:00. That's all you basically got to hit. And then the lights go out and then there's very limited options from there. All right, you can maybe find an after party or something and drag it into something. But Burning Man, you got an option to say yes and keep going always if you want to.
And I also found myself asking quite often as I was riding around, what makes Burning Man different? Why can we have 50 to 70,000 people who are pretending to be the best versions of themselves for a week, and it kind of works? Where
the people are picking up other people's trash.
Yeah.
People are helping each other out. You're getting random fucking hugs.
Somebody loses a bike, they go find you a bike they own and give it to you. What makes it so different from each person's ability to pretend to be or to be that best self 72 hours later when they're clocking back into work, waiting in Starbucks, and the person in front of them is taking way too long to figure out the chip reader, et cetera, and they start to get pissy and really irritated. So I don't have a ready question for that, but some of the aspects of that I ran through my head as a thought experiment was like, is it the duration? If Burning Man were 3 weeks long instead of a week long, could people actually sustain it? Could they keep it up? Mm-hmm. Or would the acting / reducing valve on poor behavior run out at some point? Would the decision fatigue set in and then people would start to break? Maybe not. But as a social experiment, I think it's endlessly fascinating.
I think there's a couple other things worth exploring. One is selection bias, because people who are going, Burning Man is a hard place to get to. You got to work for it. There's a lot of people we know who probably would love Burning Man, but haven't gone just because it's daunting and scary. And if you're afraid and expensive, and if you're afraid of the dust and afraid of, certain these, and you're not fully ready for this, you'll find an excuse not to go to Burning Man. So there's some definitely selection bias. And then I think when you do there, because of the hardship, just like in any tribe or any fraternity, there's kind of this bonding that comes from the difficulty of it. Like you're totally all in a shared experience. You all had to cover your face for that dust storm. You all had to go through some of the challenges that Burning Man provided. So it's a little bit easier to have everybody feel like, oh, brother, sister, like this is my tribe, And so I think that helps. Whereas in the wide old world, we've learned that, well, people don't really treat us like tribe, and we probably don't treat everybody else like tribe. And there's none of these bonding rituals or any kind of selection criteria that gives you that sense of community that I think Burning Man provides. And I think that's another huge piece.
Totally. And I think a lot of it is just dumb luck that came up with a handful of rules that happen to scale to 70,000 people.
Yeah.
And choice of location, like you mentioned, if it were in Bali or someplace that permitted people to leave their trash, everything would change.
It's EDC.
Yeah.
It's EDC, and it's a fucking different animal then if it's right outside Vegas. You know what I mean? Like, all right, that's easy enough. I can get my room at the Cosmo and fucking bust into this thing, and we're going to leave it like a rock star, just blow it out and come back to our room that's all clean and fucking say goodbye.
Yeah.
Different thing.
Different.
And, inevitably, you have to deal with all kinds of shit. Like we ran out of all non-alcoholic beverages in our RV day one. Day one.
How did that happen?
I was some failure of logistics, some lack of delivery. But literally, I was just watching all of the maple water, all the sparkling water that we ordered. We got a fraction of the order we ordered. All that disappeared. So my drinking receptacle was I poured out a handle, because we way over ordered alcohol because we weren't really drinking that much. So poured out a handle of Tito's vodka and filled it with potable water that our camp provided, and I was just rolling around with a handle of Tito's vodka water, and that was my thing. But that's normalized, like that experience, and then everybody shares that thing, because I had a handle's a good amount of water, and then people were always running out of water, so everybody's communally like lending in, like, oh, you got some water? Yeah, sure, I got some water. And random strangers will have water, or you'll have a little pile of clothes and you're dancing around, and somebody will appreciate your dancing and leave you a gift under your pile of clothes. So you'll pull it all off and be like, fuck, a bag of jelly beans. That's amazing. That's incredible. And so it kind of cultivates this, everybody looking out for each other.
Yeah. I'm most interested personally in how, and if it's possible to take elements of the experience of Burning Man and incorporate it or replicate it in other areas. Because I don't, my girlfriend said the same thing. It was her first time at Burning Man. And she said, I had a great experience. It was super intense. I'm really happy we went, but I'm not itching to go back next year. Like I don't feel
says everybody for the first 3 months after Burning Man. Yeah. Then it starts to creep on you again after that a little bit.
But I took a 10-year break, right? And I have enjoyed Burning Man, but I'm even more interested in, I think, exploring how my favorite aspects of it could be incorporated in other ways, possibly.
Yeah, that makes
which is not necessarily across the board feasible, right? You're not going to have multi-story high art pieces all over your backyard, but this. How do you encourage people to pretend to be the best versions of themselves until they become closer to that best version of themselves? That's a tantalizing question for me.
Yeah. One of my inspirational teachers, Paul Selig, he speaks the words that, you sing people's song until they remember the words.
Yeah.
And so it's this attitude of viewing yourself and viewing other people in the best light possible and holding that vision until other people look at you like, oh, wow, you're seeing me as my best self. Maybe I am that.
Yeah.
And I've seen that as an employer. I've seen that as a friend. I've seen that as a lover. I've seen that Whereas if you can always see from that perspective, people will more likely meet you at that perspective. Whereas if you walk them down that path of judgment and criticism and seeing them in their worst, you'll end up feeling some of those same feelings, and they'll end up actually showing you those aspects more readily.
Well, I mean, that begets also, so many questions that I love teasing with in my own head, such as, how much of each person pretending to be their best self is a function of them deciding that before they get to Burning Man, versus having 69,000 plus other people walking up to you wide open energetically, expecting you to be your best self.
Yep.
Right?
Impossible to decide.
Yeah.
Which is the coercive factor, because both are contributive. It's really undeniable there. So talk to me a little bit about, because you've gone on your own, psychedelic and other practice, based journey on really finding out the truth of who you are in the best version of yourself in the best way. But typically that comes from suffering. It has for me, and for most people that comes from a place, some of those dark moments and those dark places, the places where you haven't got it figured out, the places where you are hurting, and then seeking the solution to that. So, what are some of these forces that have kind of driven you to follow this path?
Let's see where to begin. I would say that I experienced a lot of my childhood as quite difficult, and had some fairly awful things happen that I won't get into right now, but people can use their imagination. And ended up, for certainly my adolescence all the way up through college, decided for many different reasons that rage was a fuel I would use. And it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly where that comes from, probably multiple places. But I decided very early on that one of my advantages, because I didn't feel like I had many advantages, so one of my advantages I would cultivate was pain tolerance, and that I would get really good at suffering. And one can see why this as a long-term strategy might not be ideal. But it did serve me. It served me for a long time. And I was able to do things that people weren't willing or able to do, because I could just metabolize this pain in some odd way. And a lot of the rage that I felt towards other people, although I don't think I was ever abusive, or very rarely exploded at other people, but I would direct that anger at myself.
Oh, yes.
And used that rage as jet fuel for, in most cases, some type of competition, whether that was competition in school, competition in wrestling. It's like I was always the guy who could suck more weight, I was cutting my senior year of high school from 178 to 152 twice a week. And that is without IV rehydration. So you just start thinking about this and you're like, good God. I mean, it is just incredible that I didn't have some type of organ failure. And these types of, I suppose, thought patterns, self-directed loathing, and despite all outward indications of success or moving in the right direction, right?
Well, they were linked.
Yeah, very well. Could have been. And it's hard to imagine them not being interlinked. But these are behaviors and thought patterns that, at least to my recollection, weren't things I talked myself into. They weren't things I reasoned myself into. I wasn't like, you know what? Self-loathing would be a great strategy for success and achievement.
9 p.m. I got to get my hour of self-loathing in.
Yeah. Where's my cat of nine tails? Let me whip my back. There was not a conscious decision after considering all the options. So I began at one point and had some early exposure in college to psychedelics, which seemed to, despite how haphazardly they were used. I mean, in retrospect, it just makes me facepalm because it was so irresponsible, since we didn't have any resources, didn't have any instruction, direction, anything, but showed me the potential to, in a sense, hit the reset button and allow me to see things with fresh eyes.
Yep.
As opposed to simply repeating the same stories I've always told myself in my head. I would get a break. It wasn't permanent, but I would get a grace period, this afterglow of perhaps anywhere from a week to a month, where I could just see things more clearly and make better decisions. And had a number of very scary experiences. One in particular, keeping in mind, I mean, we were just rolling the dice every time we took this stuff, and we weren't going out of our way to be dangerous, but I did come out of one trip standing in the middle of the road at night with headlights coming at me. Not ideal. And after that, decided I was done. So I took a long break from psychedelics, but as these habitual or compulsive thought patterns and behaviors continued, was encouraged by an ex-girlfriend to revisit psychedelics as a way to potentially address or better understand some of the things that we haven't reasoned ourselves into.
Yeah.
Right? And so those are some of the contributing factors and life experiences that led me to look at these tools. And it's also led me to look at other tools outside of psychedelics. I mean, it is one incredibly attractive tool set of tools.
Yeah.
But I'm also interested in other means of accessing those things that we didn't consciously decide to incorporate as part of ourselves.
That function is a pattern interrupt and almost like a map finder, where you actually know what it feels like to be in unicity with all things and consciousness. You know what it feels like to be radically in forgiveness of yourself and your flaws, and in a state of love, like you're the sun and you're just shining equally on all these things around you and receiving all the love, like Rumi did. You know, the whole world was Rumi's beloved, receiving all the love from the world. Like, you can taste that and be like, oh, here's a perspective that I can now apply and try to find my way back. But the mind will confuse you and put up evidence and create these little tunnels and pathways that you'll have to cut through. But at least knowing that state, and at least having that as part of your somatic and psychological memory of like, oh, I've felt something different than this, and maybe I can find my way back. It's really helpful. It's like really helpful.
Yeah, to know it exists.
To know it exists.
Which is also something, when I was volunteering at Zendo, that came up quite a bit, because people would experience these bouts of paranoia or depression or guilt, and they would also have these periods of elation, and they wanted to access that, and they would grasp at it because they felt like it was so fleeting. And I'm like, that's something you're doing on your own. Like, it is your mind that's doing this, currently with the assistance of something else. Yeah. But that is something, once you experience it, that you can navigate your way back to. And to your point, once you've felt this peace, very often at seeing the absurdity of how you deem many things important that are just fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. And howling with laughter.
Yeah, just like, why am I getting so wound up about things A through Z? They're completely inconsequential. Like, as we sit here as, you know, monkeys spinning on a rock in the middle of space. But that firsthand experience of peace or self-love or self-acceptance or forgiveness of someone else or yourself, as you mentioned, I think as a proof that it can exist as a felt experience is very powerful.
Yeah.
What you then do with that is a bigger question, right?
Sure.
Because there are people just like those people who go to Burning Man who go to escape. They do not go to explore and to incorporate. They go to escape. And there are people who go to psychedelics for the same thing.
And they just carve out that experience as a psychedelic only experience. Yeah. And they don't apply those lessons broadly enough to your life. But once you start learning the tools and learn not only what to feel like, but what are the traps that you can get in, and what are the things that might be happening. You know, I realized recently, just to tell a personal story of something that came up after Burning Man, obviously I had this accident where my face and my smile is at least for the time being, significantly changed, and I'm not as strong and I'm not as capable. I'm tired a lot. My body's still recovering from this. And, the night of the whole time of the accident, I knew it happened for me, not to me. And that was from a billion lessons in stoicism and psychedelics and teachings and going against resistance and seeking those hard spots and those fears. And I had that. But what I didn't also realize is from that very first night when I was mangled and bloody and I was fooling around with Whitney in the hospital bed sheets, I was somehow utilizing her validation of me as still being whole and still being beautiful, because she was still attracted to me. She was still horny, even though I was a fucking bloody mess that night, and I'm on painkillers and I'm hooked up to a heart monitor, and we'd start fooling around and the heart monitor would go off and the nurse would come in and we'd be like, doing nothing here. Yeah, everything's good. Like, do you need any more meds? Like, nope, good. Just get out of here, please. So I had borrowed some validation from her and that made me feel whole. And it made me feel like, yeah, I'm still a man, and then at Burning Man, Whitney really got to connect with one of her lovers who's now, I basically consider her and him boyfriend, girlfriend. And it's a relationship that had escalated to a point where I hadn't had to experience that with Whitney. Nothing has gone this deep with another one of her lovers. And so as I experienced that and she spent some time with him afterwards, and that validation from her was temporarily withdrawn and shown to another person, then all of a sudden I'm feeling like, oh man, I'm injured and I'm broken and I'm weak and I'm not attractive and all of these things, because I was borrowing her validation to bolster my own self instead of actually having it be radical self-acceptance for what I was. I was actually borrowing some support from her. And then when she removed that support like a crutch, I could actually feel where I needed to support my own wounds, the areas where I needed to, okay, I got to love myself for this. And I can't be dependent on anybody, including Whitney, and Whitney, of course, still has that. It didn't go anywhere, but my mind wouldn't allow me to accept all that. And so I had to build it. And I'm in the process of building that back up on my own, outside of the validation. But I wouldn't have been able to see any of that if it wasn't for the training, And so even though I still feel it, even though I still feel some of those feelings, that I'm not worthy of love anymore, I kind of go, okay, I see what's happening here. I have sympathy and empathy for myself. And I welcome the challenge now. I welcome the challenge to build those true feelings of how to respond to this accident, from this experience. And that's such a gift and that's such a blessing to be able to look at things and acknowledge like, okay, here's a hard level. This is a hard level. And I was getting support. Now I got to build it on my own. But to even know that it's that way, I can win. Like I can beat it. I can actually do the work to actually support myself and advance beyond it. But without that introspection and awareness, I'd be fucking hopeless. I'd be mad at her. I'd be mad at him, or I'd be, my mind would tell me all these things when I can just acknowledge like, okay, well, I have some work to do to really love myself in this new condition and love myself when I'm a little bit less capable. Like that's some effort.
How are you thinking about approaching that, or how are you approaching that?
I think I know that. So it goes back to knowing the truth. Like I've known the truth of who I am as pure consciousness beyond this monkey body and that I've built, in the Onnit gym and everywhere else my whole life. I've known myself as that, and I've known myself as a force of love, and I've known that that's the true me. So it's really now applying the remembering of that to this current state and being like, brother, that doesn't matter. Like you felt yourself as just a force of consciousness beyond the incarceration of your cellular expression. You've known yourself as that, and you've known that thing is worthy of love. So remember you still are, no matter what this woman or anybody actually says, like you felt it and you know it. And that's something that I wouldn't be able to do if I never felt that or tasted that. If I hadn't done 5-MeO or ayahuasca or one of these other psychedelics, that to me was my path. That was my way of getting to a state where I knew myself as consciousness and knew that consciousness as love in giving and receipt of all the love.
When you have that realization and that truth, how do you translate that into, or how are you thinking about translating that into practices so that it doesn't get forgotten, right? Mm-hmm. So that it's reinforcing.
The key is I can't double down on any of the parts of the mind that want to create another reality. Like I have to radically admit to myself, to Whitney, to my friends, like, man, I'm just feeling low and small and weak and wounded and injured. And that's making me feel a bit insecure. And then just admitting that, and then everybody going, I see you. I feel what you're going through, you know? And just, I think it's that same paradigm that we've talked about where everybody just kind of normalizes that and like, oh, that makes sense, brother. Yeah. And then instead of trying to create something that justifies it and like, well, I can't believe she's doing this and I can't believe, and look at me, I'm like this. Everybody just kind of normalizes it. And it's really been in the communal sharing of that with myself, first and foremost, to not trick myself into thinking that this isn't just an opportunity to do work, but also then sharing that with people who have also felt the same states that I felt and also seen me expressed, you know, not just as my man, but when I can get out of my way and do something as my best self, which is not what I do in the Onnit gym. I mean, that's cool. That's fun. You know, like I have fun on the basketball court too, but that's not why I'm actually here or why I'm actually worthy of love. It's when I can get out of the way and be my higher self expressed. And just so to be willing to have people still see me in that, you know, still see me in that light. It's a really valuable tool to have a community that can help receive it. And that's been probably the thing that's helped me the most.
What has Kyle said to you? Kyle's a perceptive guy.
He's a very perceptive guy. And
he's very aware.
Very aware. And I think I can talk to Kyle so openly. And it's not even what he says, it's just how he receives it. You know, like I once heard Jesus Christ, the energy of Christ consciousness explained to me by an ayahuasca shaman, Hamilton Morris. And he said, if you meet Christ.
There's an ayahuasca shaman named Hamilton Morris?
Hamilton, it's Hamilton Souther. Hamilton Morris is he's the psychedelic. I was like, that doesn't sound right.
Hamilton's Hamilton's been holding out on me.
Hamilton Souther.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, wrong Hamilton. Yeah, but Hamilton Souther. So he says, when you meet Jesus Christ, Christ consciousness, not the man, you know, but the consciousness that's symbolized by that, you show your very worst, that worst thought you've ever had, that worst thing you've ever done, that thing you're most ashamed of, and you show all of that, and you receive from Christ consciousness that there isn't even a flinch. There isn't even a moment of judgment. There isn't time for forgiveness. You don't have to reach for holy water, do 10 bows, do a little dance to get forgiveness. You're pre-forgiven. The love was never wavering. There wasn't even a flinch. Like love held no record of wrong. Like the Christ consciousness never even saw that as a flaw, you know? And like that was so powerful for me to like recognize like, oh, so you don't have to earn the forgiveness from the force of Christ consciousness. That's why it's such an important symbol, because it's already there, you know? And so for Kyle, not trying to compare him to Christ consciousness, but in a way I can express my hardest thing. And he just kind of nods and just doesn't flinch and goes, yeah, brother. Yeah, brother. And that to me right there is like enough to go like, oh, I'm okay.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm doing fine. Everything's going to be okay. And that's a really, you know, powerful element of the friendship. And yeah, we can spin off into words and discuss certain things and get into practicum and how to handle that. But it's that first moment of just pure attention and like unwavering, unflinching truth and acceptance of who I am that is really transformative.
So that in the volunteering quite a bit because I had a lot of time to sit.
And
sometimes my people would be out cold, so I'd be observing what's going on in the room, and very often it seemed like the people who tried to do the most, to talk the most, were the least consoling. To people.
Yeah,
and it was very often just someone who would sit there and with zero expectation, but with like eyes and ears open, heart open, just sitting calmly, who were able to, in turn, calm the other people with them.
Because when you're in one of those hard moments, anything that someone says, because I've expressed this to a lot of different people and I've had different reactions.
Yeah.
And sometimes people will be trying to help. They say that old aphorism, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? They're trying to help, but they say something. And I'm like, oh man, that thing really stings a little bit, actually, and I think that's something that can happen in all cases where the words can be interpreted in a million ways, but you know what can't? You sitting in the field and vibration of love and acceptance and, shared empathy and understanding where someone is, like that rarely is misinterpreted. And I think that's that's a real valuable thing you can give to somebody. How is this? All right. So we don't have too much time left, but I want to ask you how all of your experiences, psychedelic, growth-wise, all the different tools that you've used, how has it changed your own views on love and relationship?
I would say that I'll lead into it by saying I heard at some point that Gertrude Stein had said that and I'm paraphrasing here, it might be misattributed, but I think it's accurate, had said that the golden rule can be reversed, or it should be, in the sense that, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Also do unto yourself as you would do unto others. And I think for me, I've come to realize that I can help myself by helping other people. I can help other people by helping myself. And that those two are very much mutually reinforced or mutually deteriorated. And that when you can't make yourself happy, focus on making someone else happy, and it'll often end up in the same place, right? When you're having trouble working on, say, self-talk to yourself, you can work on nonviolent communication and practice that in a very concrete way, which is easier to track than trying to trace each of your thoughts and responses to your thoughts. And that for me, love is really one of those words that never made sense to me, or I didn't quite know what to do with it until the last few years, where you have, in certain circumstances, not exclusively psychedelics, but certainly that is fertile ground for this type of experience, where you experience love as something nearly ineffable, something that's very hard to describe, but that makes sense contextually when afterwards you, say, read poetry, which is not something I ever did until a handful of years ago, but you read Hafez or Rumi and you're like, okay, now this actually is starting to make sense to me. Yep. And if I were to try to express it, I would say that in my very limited experience, love and a sense of peace with yourself and with other people comes more from acceptance than understanding. And if you are type A personality, if you are good with spreadsheets and business plans and executing and long-term vision and 3-year plans and so on, very often the first instinct is to go with your strengths and try to deduce rationally, pro and con list out whatever it is that's confounding you to try to find peace through understanding. And my experience has been certainly strive for understanding. And I'm not suggesting people should just choose ignorance and stick their head in the sand on all things, but that there are so many things in life outside of your control, including how other people respond to you expressing truth or how you feel, that love and peace for me have come more from accepting how many things are outside of my control, versus trying to buckle down and think my way through it. And understand.
Makes sense. That control of outcome is a fallacy ultimately to a certain degree. We have control of effort. We have a control of, are we doing our best?
Yeah.
It's really what we have control over. But do we have control of whether someone loves us? No. Or control of whether they follow the path of healing or do the thing that's best for them? No. We have control of us providing whatever support is best. And maybe that is wordless, and maybe that's, very little, or maybe that is a lot. Maybe that is actually sitting down with them on a piece of paper and being like, okay, what is the most important thing for you? What's your mission? Where do you want to go? What's this? Maybe it is that, but maybe it's not.
Yeah.
And divorcing yourself of that idea that, as I'm sure you've had this as I have, where you can get with somebody and figure out all their shit, point to all of it, and they're going to be like, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. Got it. I'm going to do all that. And then you've figured it out. You've done it. That's not exactly how relationships work.
Yeah. No, it's certainly the case. And I'm a bit of a slow knuckle dragger. So it's taken me a long time to not default to fixing. And what I've only realized recently is that doesn't only apply to, say, past girlfriends or romantic relationships, where they'd be like, here's this, oh my God, I'm feeling this, I'm having this problem. Be like, great, let's fucking fix it right now. Like, let's lay it out instead of just listening empathically and allowing them to feel whatever it is they feel is necessary or is coming up at the moment. And it's easy in retrospect to see that. But what took me longer to notice is that I also did that with myself. I would not allow myself to feel anything. I viewed that as a primitive, handicapping, unhelpful response to anything that might be happening. And my belief was that in all circumstances, the answer was to be as Vulcan-like as possible and unemotional so that I could spreadsheet and fact my way out
that
of
should
whatever
be like
dilemma.
that should actually be a verb when you're spocking when you're spocking a situation, It's just being a human calculator.
And there's certainly a place for,
no doubt,
for all of that, but it is a tool. It's not the only tool. And if you disallow yourself from feeling emotions, particularly those emotions that you view are negative, right? I can't remember who said this to me, but I think it was Tara Brach, who's just an incredible meditation teacher and also spectacular writer. I recommend her book, Radical Acceptance, to everyone. Terrible title, fantastic book that touches on this quite deeply. But I think it was Tara Brach who said, there was a sage who said there's really only one question worth pursuing, and that is, what is it that you are unwilling to feel?
Damn.
Yeah. And that will take you really far if you spend some time on that. So I've been thinking about that a lot in the last few years.
It's a good thing for all of us to think about. No doubt. Well, man, it's a fucking pleasure to have you here.
Yeah,
and drop
thanks for
by.
having me.
It's so cool that you're here in Austin and we get to hang out and do shit like this and get some food and play, man. I love it. This is beautiful. I really appreciate you. And so many people who I talk to, as you're just such an inspiring force, doing so much good for the world and for people. And, just on my behalf, I'm one of those people. Just so much gratitude for you for not only providing the information, but for doing the fucking work for realsies. Not for pretensies, not for the camera, not for the show, not for the spectacle of it, not for the mala beads or the badge on your Boy Scout shirt that says I did ayahuasca, but for doing it for realsies.
Thanks, brother.
So I really appreciate that. Anything you want to let people, obviously, man, listen to the Tim Ferriss podcast, people, please. That's fucking incredible. We had a great time when I was on there as well. And there's tons of incredible interviews. One of the master interviewers. And so definitely listen to that. But what else? What else can people kind of dig into?
What else can people dig into? I would say if people are interested in seeing what I'm up to, the latest experiments and cool, odd things that I find on a regular basis, you could certainly check out the newsletter. I think the newsletter is the fastest growing, in some ways, most exciting thing that I'm up to these days. I think it's like 1.4 million people or something.
Fuck yeah.
On the newsletter. So I send out a short little list of bullet points every Friday, 5 Bullet Friday, which is just the coolest, craziest, weirdest stuff that I've come across that week. It's free. It'll always be free. So you can check that out at tim.blog/Friday. And otherwise, I would say for those people who had any of what we're talking about resonate, I would highly recommend Tara Brach's book, Radical Acceptance. Brach is spelled Brach. If you search Tara Brach and Tim Ferriss, I also did interview her on the Tim Ferriss show because I was so impacted by that book. And I would say, don't view feelings as a liability. I think they are part of being human. And if you've spent the majority of your life developing the unemotional, detached approach to problem solving, it would be very well worth spending some time with how you feel. I think that can go a really long way towards self-acceptance, and ultimately, if you just want to view it from a performance standpoint, to better performance and achievement in life.
Because when you know how you feel and are able to feel how you feel, you'll be able to see other people.
Exactly.
Because all humans are emotional creatures.
Yeah.
Or responding to their emotions in an interesting defensive way, which makes them Spock their way out of any situation. So, but you'll be able to see that.
Definitely. You'll be able to see it and relate to other people, and you'll be able to drive without the emergency brake on. So I would encourage people to certainly check that out.
Wise advice, my brother. Thank you for everybody tuning in. So much love. We'll see you next week.